This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, and welcome to Season 11 of the podcast, and I think this season is absolutely going to be our very best season that we have put forth yet in the 200-plus episodes, in the 10 seasons that we have already done. I think this is our best we've ever done, and I'm excited to kick off this season of the Moonlight Graham Show with maybe one of the most famous guys we've ever had here on the podcast, and probably certainly our most famous and successful current athlete that we've ever had here on the show. He was a two-time All-American, first-team All-American at Duke. He was a McDonald's All-American before that. He has played the last 15 seasons of his life in the NBA, and I actually think he's made the NBA playoffs in 14 of those 15 seasons. He's made over $100 million in his NBA career. His name is JJ Redick. That's right, we have JJ Redick here on the Moonlight Graham Show, and you're probably asking yourself, does JJ Redick fit the underdog story of the Moonlight Graham Show? And also, how in the heck did you get JJ Redick on the podcast? Well, to answer both of those questions, first of all, JJ Redick, he might not be the typical underdog that we have here on the show, but if you've been following his NBA career over the past 15 years, you know that JJ Redick has developed into one of the very best role players in the NBA. He's an outstanding shooter, one of the best shooters to ever live. And it's been fun to watch his NBA career progress because in college, obviously, this guy was the man. He was a cold-blooded killer at Duke. He was cocky. Everybody hated him, and he delivered every night, especially in Cameron Indoor. Then he goes on to the NBA. He's a first-round draft pick, but he had to figure out how to fit in the NBA, the role player of the NBA, how to become a really great role player, and he's done that, and that's why his career has lasted as long as it has. So absolutely, JJ Redick is a role player, and we're all about the role players here on the Moonlight Graham Show. So the next question is, how in the heck did you get him here on the podcast, right? We're just this lowly podcast from Des Moines, Iowa. So how did we get a big name like JJ Redick, who obviously is successful in the NBA, but he also has a successful podcast company as well? And so to answer that question, I noticed about a year ago on Twitter, for some reason, JJ started following the Moonlight Graham Show Twitter account on Twitter. And I just, in the back of my head, thought that's kind of interesting. Maybe JJ wants to come on the podcast at some point. So at that time, I DM'd him and kind of made a pitch for him to come on the show. He never responded back, and I thought, okay, maybe he just accidentally is following our podcast. Who knows? So time goes on, and a couple of months back, one of our followers tweets at us and says, "Hey, Moonlight Graham Show, did you notice JJ Redick is following your podcast?" And I tweeted back, and JJ Redick was tagged in this. And I said, yeah, I noticed he's following us. I have no idea why, but I think it's kind of cool. I wonder if JJ has ever played hoops in the state of Iowa. Not 5 minutes later, Redick responds on Twitter and says, "I used to come to the Iowa State basketball camp every summer because my aunt ran a lab in Ames, Iowa." So he was very familiar with Iowa. And I said, well, if you ever want to come on to talk about your time you spent in Iowa and playing hoops at those Iowa State team camps or player development camps, let me know. And we were able to set up this interview. And let me tell you, this was one of my absolute favorite interviews that I have done in the 200 plus episodes that we've done here on the podcast. This one stands out because JJ's a cool guy. He's a pro's pro when it comes to interviews and podcast. So obviously this was a really fun interview because the guy knows what he's doing. Also, the guy knows Iowa. Like, he's played tons of hoops in Iowa. He knows a lot of the guys around his age that played basketball at Iowa from that era, like Jeff Horner, Greg Bruner, those guys, Nick Collison. Kirk Heinrich, Kyle Korver. Redick knows all these guys, so he's familiar with that era of basketball that is really special to people of the state of Iowa. So this was obviously really fun. I couldn't think of a better way to launch season 11 of the podcast than to bring out JJ Redick. I think you guys are really going to love this. And to add an extra wrinkle to season 11, we're actually going to do a few things a little bit differently. We're adding in a little bit of a wrinkle at the end of each episode for this season. And so make sure to stay listening at the very last 5 minutes of the episode, because every week we're going to have this wrinkle. We're going to expand on it each and every week because we got a little bit of a goal for this season, something we want to accomplish as a podcast, and you guys can follow along at the end of every episode. So make sure to tune in at the end of this interview and episode as well. But if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. And we would love it, folks, if you left us a 5-star review. You can also follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. Getting the feedback from you after each episode from the audience is one of the best parts about this show. So keep providing feedback. We really do appreciate it. But enjoy this season of the podcast and enjoy this episode, especially with JJ Redick. Awesome for him to come on. Great guy, great moonlighter, great episode. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this season, folks. All right. JJ Redick, you're on. Welcome to the Moonlight Graham Show, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be fun.
So, I noticed a while back, maybe during the pandemic, you started following our Twitter account.
Yes.
Now, I ask, did you even realize you're following our account, and why are you following us?
So I realize I'm following the account. Yes, let me answer that part of the question first. I think it had something to do with JD Schulten.
Okay.
So I think that's because I started following him. And then just because, this was, I think, when all the social justice stuff was happening, maybe last spring or whatever. So I ended up following a bunch of politicians in different states, different backgrounds. And then I feel like that's the connection. He was running for Congress in Iowa.
Yep.
And I know we'll probably discuss this, but I have an Iowa connection. So it just kind of seemed natural. And then I came across the Twitter feed for this. And I mean, who doesn't love baseball?
I agree. I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast, right? Yeah. So JD, I actually met through this podcast. He started following our show. He likes all the same things that I like. And so he might be our biggest fan out there. So hats off to JD Schulten. He and I are like the only washed up baseball players in Iowa that throw bullpens into our backyards. So he and I also have that in common.
That's amazing. Actually, I got asked, we did a pod yesterday with Jack Flaherty from the Cardinals.
Oh yeah.
And I tried to avoid it, but my co-host Tommy brought up the fact that I thought I would be a Major League Baseball pitcher. And so he asked me, he was like, how fast could you throw right now? Because I was a pitcher.
Yep.
And I'm going to ask you that question first. Like, how fast are you throwing in that bullpen in your backyard?
So I'm trying to get back up to 90.
Jeez.
I want to get back up to 90. There's a Field of Dreams game happening, and Barstool Sports is putting on a game before the game. And JD and I are actually trying to both get on the team for that game. And if I make the team for that, I want to be at 90.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have a connection at Barstool, I assume, right?
I do not. No,
I'll talk to Big Cat. We'll get you on the team. Big Cat will get you on the team. He lives across the street from me in Brooklyn. We'll get you on the team.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that because JD last year, I helped him train. He hit 87 during his campaign trail, and I was there when he hit 87. And I'm a few years younger than JD. I've never had any injuries. I think I can get back to 90. I was at 91 a couple of years ago. And it'd be pretty cool to hit 90 at the Field of Dreams.
That'd be amazing. It'd be amazing. I mean, I can't get anywhere near that.
Where are you at? So how did you respond to Jack Flaherty?
I told him, look, I'm not going to go to a bullpen right now and throw as hard as I can in 5 pitches. Like, I'm going to need a ramp up period. So I said to him, if you give me 2 to 4 weeks, like, I can for sure throw 80. I mean, I know how, like, I have, like, you know, when I go out, when I was with the Pelicans, we did a bunch of stuff last summer on the Saints turf field, on their indoor practice facility. We share a facility with them, essentially. There's basically a cafeteria in between our practice facility and their practice facility. So we did some conditioning work prior to the bubble last summer. And, you know, I'm by no means like, am I like a quarterback, but like, you know, like in the air, I can throw, you know, 55, 60 yards, like on a string. So it's like, and that's not with me warming up or training. So I'm like, all right, you know, I can throw a football pretty far with a spiral. I used to throw a baseball really hard. So I'm stronger now than when I quit baseball. So I'm like, 80. 80's the baseline number, plus or minus 80.
So, okay, I think that's realistic. I really do. Because I'm going to jump to it right now. I've been a big fan of your pod for a while, and I have been surprised at how often baseball comes up. It came up with like Zach Levine is like a closet baseball fanatic. Drew Holiday and all his brothers are like baseball fans. It came up in the Cade Cunningham interview. You know, Cade Cunningham was a football player, but you were brought up the baseball as well. So like, you've been playing hoops for a long time, but you know, that itch for baseball, where's that come from?
You know, for me, baseball was my first love. So to provide a little background, I have older twin sisters, and they actually gave me my name. They would say things at the same time. One would say Jay, the other would say Jay. You know, it turned out to be JJ. And as long as I can remember, it was JJ. And I thought that was the coolest thing. They were my heroes. Whatever they did, I did. When we lived in Charlottesville, they started riding horses. So I learned how to ride a horse. Then they started playing softball. So then I started playing t-ball and Little League baseball. Then when they were 13, they were like 6 feet, 6'1", and they started playing basketball. They picked up a basketball in the freshman year of high school. They ended up getting Division I scholarships, but I was 8 at the time, and I started playing basketball. But up until when I quit baseball, baseball was my first love. I was better at baseball, and I liked baseball better. And for me, honestly, the itch was control. Because basketball, like, there's so many things dynamically happening. If you play any other position in baseball, you're not in control. And when you're on the mound, you have control of the game. And that to me was what I loved about pitching.
So was that tough to give up as a 7th grader?
It was. You know, and the funny thing is, I gave it up before, from basically the beginning of 7th grade to the beginning of 8th grade, I grew close to 9 inches. Wow. So I was about 5'6", 5'7", somewhere in that range at the end of 7th grade. By the end of, you know, the 8th grade, a year later, like, I was 6'3", you know, so and then I grew another inch in high school. But, you know, I stopped playing baseball before I got tall, which is kind of crazy.
Right.
But it was really hard. And, you know, it came down to my dad. Like, I'll tell you the story. So, you know, after 6th grade, I played in the AAU national tournament for the first time, 2 weeks in Utah. I get back from the trip on a Sunday. I'm exhausted. And it would get back about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. For whatever reason, I had forgotten that my all-star team was playing in the state tournament. And so he says to me, you know, you got to pitch tomorrow. And I'm like, huh? He's like, yeah, Tom pitched yesterday. You guys got a game tomorrow. You got to win it to get out of pool play. So I'm like, all right. So a family friend drove us across the state. We ended up having a rain delay, fortunately for me, because I got in at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Had a rain delay. I pitched the following day. Again, I hadn't thrown a baseball in like a month. And it went extra innings, 8 innings. I struck out 13 batters. I got the win. But when that tournament was over, my dad was like, look, you know, we don't really have time. We'd love for you to choose. He didn't put any pressure on me. So then in 7th grade, I did on the big field, I did fall ball all the way through fall ball. Yep. It became baseball. It became basketball season. And that was 8th grade. And I kind of blew up. And it became, and at this point I'm 6'3", and it's like, oh, he could play Division I basketball. And I made a decision that spring to not play baseball that spring. And every subsequent spring in high school, I flirted with the idea of going and playing on the baseball team. But I never ended up doing it because of AAU basketball. AAU basketball starts as soon as the school season's over, and I got into this cycle of playing basketball year round.
And that's one of the shames of any sport, like sports specialization, right? Because from my perspective, I played baseball through college, and then I played, a little bit in the minors after that. But you don't really get to enjoy the best parts about baseball. And same, it could be said for basketball, until you get to play it at a really high level, because then all of the little intricacies get to be the whole thing. And that's the best part of it, right? The pitcher catcher dynamics, the unwritten rules, the pine tar, like you really understand what all that means and how it affects the game.
As someone who is obsessively detail oriented and is constantly looking for a competitive edge in basketball.
Yeah.
That's what I would have obsessed over in baseball. And I even did it to an extent when I was 12 and 13. Like I had my things, Andrew Holben, our catcher. I had my little thing with Andrew that we would do where we would act a certain way, pretend like I was hurt. Like I just fuck with people basically. And then I gotta be honest with you, like I was not same way on the basketball court. Like I was not a nice pitcher. I was good. If you crowded the plate, like I broke a couple kids' hands. Like I wasn't intentionally to break. I was just trying to get them off the plate. You know what I mean? But if you crowded the plate, I was going to throw inside. Like at 12, I'm doing this.
Right.
And so, as you get older, and like again, like this is why I love basketball. It's the camaraderie, the gamesmanship, being in a locker room, being in a dugout, whatever it may be. Like that's ultimately what I love about team sports. And I didn't get to experience that, to your point. I didn't get to experience that at a high level in high school or with like, Babe Ruth ball.
Yeah. You would have loved the bullpen. And that's what I love about your podcast is when you talk to other hoopers, those type of conversations that you're having on your pod with other shooters, and you're talking about the craft, is the conversation in the bullpen with pitchers talking about pitching. Right. And so that's when the pine tar talk and the spider tack and the grips on the baseball and what you're doing, like all of that stuff happens in the little close confine of a bullpen. And that's why I like listening to your pod, because it's the bullpen for shooters.
Right. No, I think that's the goal of the pod. It doesn't always hit, but I think the goal of the pod is to give you a little peek behind the scenes. If you were sitting in a locker room and you had a couple guys, like these are conversations that we have in the locker room, we have on the bus, we have on planes. It's not the same as a traditional media interview. It's why I enjoy doing it. And honestly, like, I mentioned Jack again the week before we had Colin Morikawa on, and I enjoy so much talking to other athletes about their craft and their mindset. And like Colin, for me, was like, he doesn't care about like money. He's not in it for money. Like the dude just wants to win. He's so competitive. His mindset is laser focused on one thing. I got to be the best golfer in the world, and I want to win every tournament. That's all he cares about.
Morikawa, I think, thinks he can beat you in shooting. There was an element where he's like, I think Colin thinks he's a good enough shooter to beat Jay.
We're gonna hopefully when he's in the New York area in September during the FedEx playoffs, hopefully we carve out some time for our little challenge, which is going to be 10 3-pointers each, NBA 3-pointers each.
Yep.
And then we're going to hit a pitch, gap wedge. Basically for him, it'll be a sand wedge from 100 yards onto the green 10 times. Best out of 10, aggregate the scores. I basically did the math on this. I think I need to make 9 or 10 NBA threes, and then I got to get to a point in my golf game where I'm confident I'm going to hit 6 out of 10 greens in 10 tries from 100 yards. If I do that, there's no way he's going to make 10 out of 10 greens. I know that. But, like, he's not making 6 NBA threes. Right. He's not.
Yeah. Last week, I had the chance to caddy in the final round of the U.S. Open qualifier. And there was a 3-hour rain delay. And during that rain delay, I was in Columbus, right? And so all of the guys from the Memorial came over. So it was Podrick and Fowler and Joel Damon and Hudson Swafford, and we were all in the same room. And those locker room talks, and you talk about, talking with other athletes.
Yeah.
I got to be a fly on the wall for 3 hours while all those guys talked about their craft and talked about where they like to travel, course they like to play and all that stuff. And I'm just fascinated by that stuff. And that's why I had this podcast. But I thought, I bet Redick would like this as well, just to be to geek out over other people talking about their sport.
Yeah, no, I love it. I actually, to bring Colin back up, when I asked him if he could only play one course the rest of his life, you're expecting him to say, Augusta or Cypress or Pine Valley or Pebble Beach or the other famous courses. He says, no, I think it'd just be like any Discovery property where I can go in flip-flops and hit balls and take shots tequila. And so at the end of the day, as competitive and as driven as he is, golf is still a game to him. And that's pretty cool.
I think there was an element of Colin Morikawa being a little starstruck talking to you, though. And so I think he was trying to be a little bit cool. I got a little bit of he's only 24 and he's a little intimidated by JJ, so he's trying to be cool here.
I don't know about that. He did make it clear that he's 24. But he's, I think, and it's why we talked to Jack, Flaherty with the Cardinals, so much of being on a podcast is the ability to express yourself and the ability to show your personality. And I think Colin does that at a really high level. Jack does that at a really high level. And when we get NBA guests on that do that as well and are comfortable and free, and a lot of times it is the older players, that have been through the shit basically and come out the other side and are confident and secure in who they are. Then you get some really candid and great stories. The one young guy that we've had on the show and is a correspondent for our show now is Tyrese Halliburton from the Sacramento Kings. And he's in terms of his storytelling, his personality, his candidness in this setting, he's light years ahead of any young player we've ever interviewed.
Yeah, that was a great interview. Obviously, and this will be a transition for us here in this conversation, Tyrese Halliburton's an Iowa State guy, right? And so 40 miles away, Hilton Coliseum. I thought Halliburton was going to be a 4-year guy at Iowa State, so I was pretty pumped about that. He blew up, with Team USA over the summer after his freshman year, but it's awesome to see what he's doing there. But let's get into the Iowa State stuff because that's kind of how this came to be. I tweeted at you, I wonder if JJ's ever hooped in the state of Iowa. Come to find out, you grew up coming to the Iowa State basketball camps growing up. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, so my aunt ran a lab at Iowa State for decades. She took a brief hiatus to work at Washington State for a bit, but she was a virologist and she was working to basically find a cure for HIV. So she ran this lab, and my mom would just let me go up and stay with her for a couple weeks every summer. So there was 3 or 4 summers I'd go up. Some of the best memories of my childhood. We'd literally binge watch movies. I mean, every movie from the 90s is that I've watched is because of my aunt. And then one summer, the summer that Tim Floyd got the Chicago Bulls job, that was my summer after 8th grade. And, I'm going into 9th grade. I think the camp was either at the end of July or early August. And I'd finished the AAU circuit and sort of, went out and stayed with her for 2 weeks. And one of those weeks was the camp. And so when I got there, they put me with my age group. They were like, yeah, you got to be in the 8th and 9th grade group. And I played half a game and they were like, that was a mistake. We're just going to put you with the older kids. And even then I was clearly the best player at the camp. And there was a few other guys that ended up from Iowa that ended up going D1. But that camp was so important to me because until that point, I shot a set shot when I shot threes. So I would dribble inside the arc and I'd shoot a pull up, and I had, I'm tall and at the time I could jump, unlike today, but I had pretty good elevation, and then I'd shoot a set shot from 3. And so at the end of the camp, this assistant coach, and I wish I knew his name, but one of the assistants for Iowa State, he ended up going to another school. He comes up to me and he says, hey, why don't you shoot a jump shot when you shoot a 3? And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, if you can't shoot a jump shot when you shoot a 3, you'll never play D1. Wow. And he was saying it, I think, to be an asshole, to be honest with you, because he'd been tough on me the whole week. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna prove this guy wrong, and went back to Roanoke, and for the rest of that fall, I just worked on shooting jump shots from three, and by the time my freshman year on varsity started, I could shoot a jump shot.
That's a pretty good story. And actually, one of the guys from that camp who ended up going D1's a friend of mine, friend of Nick.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Well, and so when he heard you were coming on the pod, he's like, hey, talk to him about that camp, because JJ used to pal around with us and he was better than us, even though he was 2 years.
I can't, there were two kids at the camp that were really good, and they were headed into their senior year. And so Collison and Heinrich were, big time recruits at the time. And these guys, they would get them on the phone when we'd be back in the dormitories in between sessions. They'd talk to Collison, they'd talk to Heinrich, whatever. So I was like, oh, these guys, they're 2-3 years older than me. I'm like, these guys are cool. They know Collison and Heinrich. Like, I'm like, these guys are McDonald's All-Americans. Like, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. But yeah, and then I saw two of them the next summer. I was playing for Boo Williams. So after my freshman year, I started playing for Boo Williams on the 17s. I was 14, but I was on the 17s. And that first summer, we were at AU Nationals, and I saw the Iowa team watching one of the semifinals, and I recognized two of the kids, and I should have gone over and said hello.
Yeah.
But I literally at the time, I literally was like, these kids they're not going to remember me from camp. There's no way.
Yeah, well, those guys are the guys I play pickleball with on a weekly basis now.
Okay. Tell them I said what's up. What's up.
So when you think of like the state of Iowa and basketball, you're in the NBA, grew up in Virginia. What do you think of? Do you think of Heinrich and Collison? Do you think of Fred Hoiberg? Do you think of Harrison Barnes? Like, what comes to mind when you think of the state of Iowa and hoops?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So again, I never went to a game, but when I'd go see my aunt, we'd walk through Hilton, and she would tell me how crazy that place would be for games.
Yeah.
And so I think of that, I think of Fred, because again, during that sort of transformative time in my childhood to young adulthood, like Fred was the man at Iowa State. And I watched every college basketball game, more so than I watched NBA. It wasn't until I got into college that I started watching the NBA a lot. So I think of Fred. I think of the home court advantage for the Cyclones, and then I think of Jeff Horner and Greg Bruner. Those were my guys. So those guys were in my high school class. They played on the same AAU team. I think we beat them for the 1900 national championship. I should just point that out one year. But they were like my boys on the AAU circuit and in the Nike camp circuit. So we would always hang. So funny story. So this summer, Coach K was maybe going to take the Lakers job.
Oh yeah,
That was 2004. So it was over 4th of July weekend. He basically went dark. He called all his players on Thursday and Friday and said, take a few days to think about this, consider the offer. I'm going dark. You're not gonna be able to contact me. So there's this 3-day period, and you're hearing rumors like he's taking the job. You see, they offered him 5 for $40, which at the time is still insane, but which at the time was like the highest paid NBA contract,
crazy money,
ever for a head coach. So you're like, oh, this guy's going to think. So I don't know if I did reach out, but I know I talked with Buckman from University of Texas, Brad Buckman from University of Texas, and then Jeff and Greg were going to be the next call and be like, I'm going to go to one of those two schools because I know I already have friends there, and I'll hoop at those two schools. So that I think of Iowa. But the other thing when I think of Iowa too, I think of straight lines. I really do. And I know
you fly over and you see all the.
No, listen, I know there's curved roads, but when my aunt used to come visit us when we were living in Charlottesville when I was really young. We lived there from when I was 3 to 7. She'd come visit us. I'd be like, Susan, what is Iowa like? And she's like, well, there's nothing but straight roads as far as you can see. So when I started visiting her later on, when I'm 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, that's all I remember is just straight roads.
Yeah.
We
break it up. That's how we form it. The only curves in Iowa are the rivers. Everything else is straight.
Yeah.
So one more baseball question, because you brought up in your last podcast episode, Tyler Lumsden, and you brought up Tom Hagen, I think is the other guy that played pro off of your AAU team. So have those guys reached out to you? Because you're throwing kind of a lot of shade at them with your prospective baseball career and what they ended up doing. Because Lumsden was on the 40-man for 3 years. For
I know.
And you're basically saying you're better than him.
No. I'm not saying that. So I love giving those guys shit. Tyler and I, to this day, we'll still just text each other shit talking. Like that's how we sort of operate. He's still one of my closest friends. Tom has been basically my best friend since we were 8 years old. There's another guy, Ryan Hergruder, who didn't play baseball with us, but also played college, high school basketball with us. That I would consider to be, those two guys, basically Tom and Ryan, have been my best friends since I was 8. So Tom was a good pitcher, really good pitcher, but it was clear he was a great hitter and good in the field. But it was clear, like he was the best hitter on our team. Tyler played in the National League. We were same town, but like there was a dividing line, 221. Basically cut Cave Spring in half. And so Tyler was in the National League because he lived on that side of the road, and I was in the American League because I lived on the other side of the road. So didn't play against him a ton because he was a year older than me. But we had another kid that I played with, Eric Jones, who ended up pitching at Virginia Tech. Again, like I was at that age, 11, 12, 13, like I was as good as these guys. I don't know. I like to just, it's fun to say like, oh, I could have, I wouldn't say I would have made the Major League Baseball, but like I probably would have played college baseball at the very least. Right. I probably would have played. I was down that road of being able to, and again, I was doing this at like 5'5". I was,
right.
No,
I have no doubt that you would have had the talent to play college baseball and probably professional baseball at your size too. I researched Tyler Lumsden for about a half hour today.
Yeah.
If you're still good friends with him, give him a little bit of hell about his LinkedIn profile. His LinkedIn profile, I think the guy is doing really well in signs and stuff.
Yeah.
But like his baseball resume on his LinkedIn profile is just the classic ex-athlete profile. Learn how to multitask, all of these funny things that and I just got a kick out of that.
I'll text him right now as soon as I get off with you. Tyler, it bums me out. And I know he's bummed by too, but it bums me out. He never got to pitch in the big leagues.
Yeah.
He was, again, at our young age, early teens, like we knew he was going to be special. He was a lefty. He threw hard. His ball had a ton of movement. When he went to Clemson, I would try to go to as many games as possible. When he came to play Duke or when he came to play UNC, remember went to one of his games at UNC. I think he threw 8 innings, shutout, 2 walks, 11 Ks, 3-hitter, pitched twice in the World Series. In the College World Series. And like you said, the guy started the Double-A when he was with Birmingham in the White Sox organization. He started the Double-A All-Star game.
Right.
Which that's where you hide your best prospects. So like this guy was on track and for whatever reason, just never sort of broke through. But yeah, I mean, at his peak, he's a lefty starter with movement, throwing 92 to 94 with a wicked slider. Like it was fun to watch.
Yeah. And he ended up playing in Asia for a couple of years too.
Yes.
The end of his career, which is kind of cool. One last baseball thing, because when you were at Duke, there was a 2-sport guy over at NC State named Andrew Brackman that was a first-round pick on the baseball draft, but also played hoops for 2 years.
Yeah.
So when you get the scouting report on Duke about like a two-way guy or a multi-sport guy, does it just say like baseball guy, exploit this guy on the scouting report? Like, what's that say for a guy like that who splits time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would probably give everybody the respect that they deserve if they're on the team. We're not, again, we weren't treating Andrew like a superstar, but we gave him the respect. I don't know if you knew this, but Jimmy Graham did not play football. And he played against me for 2 years when he was at Miami playing basketball. He was on the
wow, that's
team.
News.
Yeah, and so and you were like, man, this guy. At the time, it wasn't that. I think Gates was maybe the only one, Tony Gonzalez, maybe the only one at the time that had sort of crossed over late in their life. But you're like, man, this guy could be a football player. He was rough. He was physical, great hands, great touch around the basket. a bruiser, and you're like, man, this guy would be, and then he turns out to be, one of the greatest NFL tight ends of his era.
Yep. Well, JJ, the way we end every episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. All right. So buckle up.
All right.
First question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
Ooh. Man, there's so many guys. You put me on the spot on this one. I gotta say, like, Drew Holiday's probably one of the greatest human beings I've met in my life. Unbelievable teammate, great friend. I'll say Drew.
Nice. Yeah, great interview with him on the pod too. I came away really liking Drew Holiday. So you've got a lot of basketball left in you, but you're on the back half of your 30s right now. So at this point, outside of an NBA championship, what is left on your basketball resume that you want to accomplish?
That's it. That's the only thing.
That's it.
There was a period of time, when I was on the Clippers, Philly years, where I was like, it'd be great if like 6 all-stars got hurt and I got named as an alternate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where I never was going to be like, I was going to be one of the 12 guys in the conference, but there was a couple of years there. My 3rd year in LA, my 2 years in Philly, where you're like, hey, look, if things break, excuse the expression, but if things break right, if a couple guys have an ankle sprain or a tight hamstring and they elect not to go, obviously you never wish a guy to be actually injured, but it happens every year, and maybe I'm on the short list, and maybe Adam Silver loves me and he'll put me on. So that was the one thing. Like, I never thought I'd be an NBA All-Star. I never thought that. But when you get close, you're like, that'd be pretty cool,
Right.
But the goal has always been an NBA championship. That's it for me. I've look, not to sound like an asshole, but I've made more money, scored more points, won more games, played more years than I ever thought possible. And for me, it's always been about trying to win an NBA championship. And, I don't know if I'll get another chance. I don't, and that's, it's scary. So that's the one thing, because I didn't win at Duke either. And that bothered me for years. I'm cool now, but it bothered me for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And maybe that leads into this next question. Obviously, at sports, we get really good at wiping the slate clean, forgetting about last night's game and just looking at what's in front of us. But is there like one shot or one game that still nags at you, still keeps you up at night?
There's 2. So I would say the LSU game, which was my last game of my college career, that nags at me. Actually, there's 3. The UConn game my sophomore year, where we're up 8. With like 3 minutes to go, which in college is like being up 8 with a minute to go in the NBA, because the shot clock, was 35 seconds at the time. So those 2 games in college. For the NBA, it's probably, it's game 7 versus Toronto. That's the game where, like, I feel like if that shot misses and we win in overtime, and again, it's no guarantee we win in overtime, but that shot misses, we win in overtime, then we would have won the NBA championship. I really believe that.
Yeah.
So that was a big what if. I'll give you one more from the pros. Game 6 at home against Houston, 2015. That was probably our best Clippers team.
Yeah.
We're up 19 in the 3rd quarter. We end up losing the game. It was a closeout game for us. And then we go back to Houston and we lose in game 7. And that was, the next 2 years, we never made it past the first round because of injuries. So that was sort of our window. We thought it was going to be a longer window in LA, and that was the end of it.
Isn't it crazy? Like, that Clippers team, like, Chris Paul's still doing it. You're still doing it. Blake Griffin's still doing it. Like, most people thought you guys would all be done by now. You're still all performing at like a really high level.
Yeah, no, it's wild to look back at that, because if you had told me in 2015 I'd still be on an NBA roster in 2021, I'd be like, no, there's no chance. Like, I'm turning 37 in 2 days. There's no chance. So and to see Chris like still be, and look, he's not as quick, he's not as whatever you want to say, but like, he's so skilled, he's so smart, he's so competitive. He's done amazing things in terms of taking care of his body over the last 2 years and making some changes in his diet and his training. Like, to see him perform at a high level at this age, at his stature, like, dude, it's amazing. And by the way, I just want to say one thing real quick. I had this discussion earlier with someone. If the Suns and the Bucks end up playing in the finals, I won't know who to root for. Because for me,
of Holiday and Paul,
because of Chris and Drew. I want those guys to win a championship so bad, and it would be gut wrenching for me if they ended up playing against each other.
Yeah. What about loudest road arena? Pro.
I played in a Game 7 in Boston as the defending champions back in 2009. I'm going to say Boston. Playoff Boston crowd is next level. And they're rowdy too, man. They're drinking. They start boozing about 4:00, 5:00 as work finishes up. They're coming to the game. They're screaming things in the parking lot. They're screaming things on the metro. You come out for warmups. It's wild, and they love their team. And they, as much as they get on the opposing team, I think the best fans are the ones that really root for their team. And those fans love their team.
Yeah. Final question then, JJ. What is the best advice you've ever received?
My dad gave this advice to me, and he'd tell me all the time when I was being a knucklehead. It's not always about you. And when I think about that, look, we all have an ego, and some people have healthier egos than other people, but we all are living in our own world to a degree. And there's been times in my life where I can sort of sense that raw resentment or being offended or the desire to draw attention to yourself. And it's like that constant reminder. He said it to me all the time as a kid. He said it to me all the time through my teenage years. Hey, dude, it's not always about you. Dad, I complain about I'm playing with this point guard. He's not passing me the ball. He's like, it's not always about you. And it's allowed me, especially in the NBA, to operate really well in a locker room because I've been able to cultivate relationships with every teammate I've ever had.
That's great. Well, JJ, thank you so much for taking the time for us today at the Moonlight Graham Show. Been a big fan of yours since back in the Duke days. I've always liked following the Duke teams and followed your basketball career and then your podcasting career. So really appreciate your time. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I talk baseball anytime. You want to get me back on during the playoffs? Let's do it.
All right, that wraps up our interview with JJ Redick to kick off season 11 of the podcast. And like I said at the very beginning of this episode, we are adding in a wrinkle this season to each episode at the very end of each episode of the podcast this season. And here's that wrinkle. Our goal for this season of the podcast, season 11, is to get Kevin Costner on the show, to make Kevin Costner a moonlighter. And we are not going to end season 11 of the podcast until we accomplish that goal and we get Kevin Costner here on the show. So at the very end of every episode of this season, we will tell you about the progress we are making to accomplish that. And part of this season is going to be asking our guest, asking our moonlighters if they know Kevin Costner, if they can hook us up with Kevin Costner, or if they know anyone to hook us up with Kevin Costner, because that's the ultimate goal here on the show. As we were talking about it as a team with Brendan Gargano, Brian Sandvig, Tom Griffin, Andy Flattery, Neil Flattery, my brothers, we're thinking, who is kind of the ultimate moonlighter out there that's a little bit pie in the sky, but also that we want to see if we can make it happen. And of course, with Costner and the Field of Dreams and the MLB game happening at the Field of Dreams and with Yellowstone, the TV show, and all this stuff going on right now, we're like, what if we got Costner here on the pod to talk about Dyersville, to talk about the Field of Dreams, and to, just to get him on the podcast? How awesome would that be? Can we make it happen? And we said, well, let's make that a goal for this season of the podcast. Let's inform our audience of our progress and how it's going all the way throughout. And we think it's going to be a really fun for you guys as an audience to see this build over the course of this season of the show. So that is the added wrinkle. Each week at the end, too, we're also going to not only talk about our progress, but I'll also fill you in on our downloads. One of the questions I get a lot of times is, how many downloads are you getting every week? And we're not going to tell you all of our statistics because I don't think you care about them, but I am going to share a little bit more of that with you guys each and every week because I get asked that question a lot of times. So I thought, let's give our audience a little bit of a peek behind the window on some of our traffic, how we've continued to grow. And I think it'll be a way to bring our audience in with the quest for Kevin Costner, and also to give you a little bit of transparency around, which episodes are successful for us and which episodes just don't really connect with our audience, at least as far as downloads go. So that's how we're going to be ending each episode of season 11. And season 11 is going to go until we get Costner here on the pod. So that wraps up our first episode of season 11 with JJ Redick. Special thanks to JJ Redick for coming on the podcast, for becoming a Moonlighter. Also, got to give a shout out to team here at the Moonlight Graham Show, Tommy Griffin, Brian Samvig, Brendan Gargano, who does all of our artwork, does a great job. Tommy, of course, is the trusted co-host. Brian is kind of our producer here on the show. My brothers Neil and Andy Flattery help out a lot with ideas and creative and bouncing different ideas off of giving me an avenue to bounce different ideas off of. So special thanks to that crew as well. And thank you, the listeners, for listening to each and every episode here. We love your support. Have a great week, Moonlighters.
This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.